Hello, class. I just wanted to review a couple of the concepts that we're going to be reviewing this week in chapters 1 and 2 in the text. If you look at the book on page 5, you see we get started on the importance of interpersonal skills. So why are interpersonal skills so important in the workplace? Is it more important to know how to do your job or to know how to do it well with others? In other words, collaboration, communication, knowing how to deal with and treat other people. On page 6, we get into management and organizational behavior, as well as the management roles. So a lot of times a manager is not able to make decisions necessarily, but can be a bit of a figurehead. And you'll see that as well in the chapter, in the section on Mintzberg. And this is Exhibit 1.1 on page 7. Let's move on to look at page 8. The three main skills that a manager should have change as they move up, hopefully up in the organization. And those three are technical, human, and conceptual. The book talks about those as well. How managers use their time is also important. If you look on page 9, what's the difference between an average manager, a successful manager, and an effective manager? And we'll talk about that. What is organizational behavior? This is the crux of the course. If you look on page 10, you have a definition, and we'll talk about the core topics that are involved in any study of motivational behavior. Page 11, we start talking about evidence-based management. In other words, are you looking at data that support the decision you're making, or are you looking at intuition? The book talks a lot about not wanting to use intuition, but any good manager really uses a combination of the two. And that's part of what's on that page, on page 11. There are a lot of disciplines that contribute to organizational behavior. If you look on page 15, one of those is psychology, and there's a great chart in Exhibit 1-3 that talks about all the different disciplines that are involved in the study of organizational behavior, as well as what they contribute and the unit of analysis. So in other words, are they looking at individuals, groups, or the organization as a system? The rest of the chapter talks about all these different, let's see, we've got, I'm just going through the chapter, so bear with me one moment. Okay, so it looks at psychology, sociology, all the different areas that work with OB and affect OB. The importance of a positive work environment is also important if you look on page 23. And of course, ethical behavior, ethical dilemmas. We're almost ridiculed today to think about ethics being involved in anything that we do. A person is perceived as being square. Well, your integrity is something that once you lose it, you cannot get it back. It's very difficult. So you have to look at your integrity, the decisions you make as a manager and as an employee, how they affect you, your team, and the organization. And all those things are covered in the chapter. There are 3 levels of analysis in an organizational behavior model. And there are processes, outcomes, process and outcomes are one of them, but inputs is the first one, then processes and outcomes. So in other words, what are you contributing? What's the effect of it? And then what's the outcome of what it is that you create? And how are you doing it? How are you creating it? Withdrawal behavior is on 28. A lot of times, excuse me, students have used that topic for their paper. And if you look at it, there's a lot of things that can be included in withdrawal behavior. We'll go through that as well. Groups are also brought in, and that's pretty much chapter 1. So if you look on page 34, you'll see the questions for review, and there are 7 of them, so you've got those covered. Let's go on to chapter 2. The key element of Chapter 2 is diversity, and diversity is key in an effective organization. We'll look at some different demographics, such as percentage of women versus men in the workplace, if you look on page 43. As we go forward, what is discrimination? And you'll see from my discussion in the echo recording that I really look at discrimination not as being always in a bad context. So in other words, if you are discriminating about what you wear to work every day, that just means you pay attention to the differences in what your selections could be. And you look at your grooming, and you look at your color coordination, and you look at everything, your hair, your nails, you are discriminating, okay? If you go out to eat somewhere, you don't just go to any restaurant. Well, as one of the students said, depends how hungry I am. But you know what I mean. You are discriminating in your selection because you're very particular about where you spend your money. And we usually do the same thing when we shop. You don't walk into the first store and buy whatever you need right from there. A lot of times you go and make selections based on sale prices and comparisons. And so look at discriminating in a little different context. We're going to talk about that. Stereotyping, of course, you want to make sure you stay away from that. It's not appropriate. What is the point of pooling everybody in one group and saying, well, you know how they are, and they all do that? Those kinds of things. So the forms of discrimination that we want to focus on that are not good are in Exhibit 2-1 on page 47, and we'll talk about those. Biographical characteristics are important as well. If you look at the age of an individual, what's their education? Where did they come from? What's their background? What's their experience? What income do they make? So this is where demographics come into play. Their race and ethnicity. Do they have a disability? A lot of times, excuse me, people have a hidden disability. We'll talk about that as well. There are other differentiating characteristics that are mentioned on page 54 and 55. So you've got those there as well. One key thing I like to focus on in this chapter is ability, and that's on page 57. There are intellectual abilities and physical abilities. And the reason I like to focus on those is because a lot of times people don't realize that what they think they can do is what they do. This is a concept called self-efficacy, and I focused on it in my dissertation. So in other words, if you don't think you can do something, guess what? You won't be able to do it. Why? Because you won't put forth the effort that you need to complete the task, because you've already decided you can't do it. So this is where the self-defeating or self-fulfilling prophecy concept comes into play, but we'll talk about that. And that's pretty much the end of Chapter 2. On page 65, you'll see the questions for review, and there are 6 of them. So again, those are things that you need to complete. If you look in the Week 1 folder, you will see the match game for Chapter 1 and 2. All you have to do is look at the echo recording for the on-site class, put the answers in there. That's just for practice. Going forward, you'll be putting the answers in and uploading the match game to Blackboard. If you have any questions, let me know. That's it for the first 2 chapters, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you, everyone.